Look at this graph.
Too often are frequency response graphs written off as something only for audio nerds or for audiophiles or something, when it can be a crucial part of making your purchasing decision or choosing how you EQ a microphone. And I want to focus on that today and talk about why I prefer some of the mics that I do when it comes to live streaming and dynamic microphones. We're going to be focusing on streamers and consumers who are buying microphones for independent broadcast and streaming, not so much music or studio production, or especially not like live stage production. And there's a lot of the more, I guess you could say, scientific aspects, which would make this subject a little too inaccessible, that I'm just going to kind of dumb down a little bit. If you're like into audio engineering school and you're looking for like a video for your classes or something, this isn't it. This is kind of a layman's terms kind of approach. I just want to show people how they can use it to help inform their microphone purchase decisions for their YouTube channel or live streams, and what it can look like when EQing and things like that. I'm EposVox, the stream professor. I've been making educational videos for live streamers and content creators here on YouTube for a very long time, have reviewed a ton of microphones, and I'm kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit on some of the magic behind choosing a microphone and why a microphone sounds the way that it does. Now, I do want to disclaim this because I already saw people in some of the recent posts about it talking about how frequency response is everything, and I don't believe, and I don't have any research that would suggest that frequency response is, everything when it comes to determining how a microphone sounds. You obviously have the other physical characteristics of the microphone, but to just make it in super simple terms, a frequency response curve is just a plotting on a graph of a measurement of the microphone. It is a measurement of how the microphone responds to certain sensitivities at a certain distance. Now, most frequency response curves will not show the distance on there. There are a couple that will. We'll talk about them. But generally speaking, most of them don't. And honestly, they get super illegible when you have, like, some microphones have graphs that have like a bunch of different distances listed, and it just becomes really hard to read because they're so small. But it's just like a light reading out of a camera, a measurement of your pulse or your blood pressure or something like that. It is the microphone's responses at specific frequencies given a certain volume. And so that's plotted out on a graph, and we're going to look at a couple as an example to kind of show what this means. All right, so in some tabs here, I have a bunch of different frequency response graphs of different microphones. The only one labeled here is this one that's labeled for the Elgato Wave. This one comes from Sound Guys. The one for the Ethos here comes from Earthworks, but all the others come from Recording Hacks, other than this one, which comes from Broadcast Supply World USA. So the graph itself is like a graph where you plot just about anything else. On one axis at the bottom, you have the frequency range, which is from low to high. So the human hearing range is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So usually that's the scale that the x-axis is plotted on, but sometimes it extends outward a little bit, upwards to like 50 hertz or 10 hertz to 50 kilohertz rather. And then the y-axis is actually the decibel range that the microphone or speaker, these graphs are used for speaker playback as well, reproduces. So how these things are usually tested. And by the way, I have purchased the gear required to do a not super scientific, but a usable enough for this YouTube channel measurement to determine frequency responses of microphones myself. So whenever the graph isn't available or a company tells you that they can't release it for nonsense reasons, I can just measure it myself and we can get this information, which is really exciting to play with. I'm super stoked to get to that point, even if it's going to be a little tedious. What we have here is basically you sound isolate the microphone with a speaker in front of it that's known either measured or complete flat response, and you send a tone that has all of the frequencies in the audible range at the same level, and then you map out at what level the microphone actually picks them up. So in an ideal world, a microphone or a speaker, their frequency response would be a completely flat line. That would be completely neutral, at least in terms of if you want ultimate mic transparency, which just means that it's completely invisible. It just displays, or not displays, but, produces the sound that it's hearing. However, for a variety of applications, and especially broadcast and streaming, which we're focusing on here, you want different frequencies emphasized in order to play to the different strings of the microphones. And a lot of microphones are primarily built with like instruments in mind and just happen to make great, vocal mics as well. Or if they're intended for broadcast, then they might emphasize, say, a little bit more of the high end for that presence boost to cut across background music, backing tracks, whatever. Or they might have an extra bass, emphasis to make a great classic rock, stinger kind of thing. And so a flat line would be considered perfect in a non-real world scenario, but you're not really going to find a whole lot of microphones like that, but we are going to talk about one that's fairly close. So as mentioned, the x-axis here, the bottom axis is low to high frequencies. And again, 20 to 20 is really all we're worried about. The y-axis is the decibels, the volume level at which the microphone picks up those frequencies. So you're going to see some frequencies are picked up louder than others, some are picked up quieter than others. And there's obviously going to be cuts, and you're going to notice that some of these graphs have distance measurements or markings or dotted lines, dashed lines, whatever. And those are some of the ones I mentioned that actually mention distances. And that matters for a reason. The SM7B graph, for example, I apologize, these are so blurry. They're always uploaded in super low resolution for some bizarre reason. The SM7B actually has lines to indicate the different modes on it. So I don't think I have it handy. It has two different switches on the back, one for a presence boost and one for a bass roll-off. A lot of dynamic broadcast microphones come with a bass roll-off switch, which is also called a high-pass filter, and this just reduces the sensitivity to lower frequencies. This is useful due to a phenomenon known as the proximity effect. The proximity effect is the ability, or the consequence of a microphone picking up more lower end frequencies or more boominess the closer you get to the microphone, and picking them or being less sensitive to them as you back up from the microphone. And a lot of microphones that suffer, I say suffer from because it's actually a consequence. It's not always considered ideal. A lot of microphones will suffer from proximity effect that still sound otherwise identical when you get a little bit of a distance. And if you want a person who wants to be all up on the microphone, but you don't want that boomy radio sound, you can engage a high pass filter or a bass roll off or a low cut to roll that off a little bit more smoothly and reduce some of the boominess. Because realistically, on a lot of microphones, the proximity effect isn't more accurately detailing your voice. It is just picking up boom due to what's called the signal pressure level, in that as I speak closer to the microphone, my voice is putting more pressure on the vocal coil, which creates that boominess. That's not necessarily more detail of the low end. It's just more boominess because I'm literally pushing into the microphone capsule a little bit more with the lower end. Now, this microphone I'm using right here, the PreSonus Revelator Dynamic, it also has proximity effect to where once I get right up on it, I can get a whole lot of boom. Or if I get back up away from it, I still sound completely natural. I just lose that extra emphasis. You're not really, depending on the microphone. There are some microphones that you move away from them and they just lose all ability to sound decent, but those are rare. Those are not super common. Whereas a mic like the SM7B, you can abuse that proximity effect and get right up on it, or you can, get some distance from it and sound completely natural. So that is what these distances represent, in that, for example, this microphone, it details what the proximity effect response would look like. So normally, if you're at a distance of greater than 1 centimeter, so 2 centimeters or so, basically like a fist away, then it's going to look like the solid red line. You've got a presence boost here that's detailed in a specific way, but then it starts rolling off so you don't get any gnarly like high frequency bleed or anything like that. The mids are completely flat, whereas the mids are where a lot of the human voice lives. You have a scoop around the actual boominess, and that's to kind of prevent voices like mine from sounding too muddy. This 200 to 400 range is where the muddiness of a voice lives. And muddiness is just kind of like, you're going to find with a lot of audio terms, it's super subjective sounding without meaning a whole lot. But like muddiness is an extra like layer of think of it like mud, like a layer of thickness that doesn't necessarily provide more detail. It just kind of clogs up the sound. Whereas the say 80 to 175-ish hertz range is where a lot of the warmth and the like grit of a voice that makes it sound thick and meaty, again, these are dumb terms, lives. And so when you get up on this microphone within 1 centimeter, then yeah, you get a lot of that meatiness and you lose some of the scoop for removing the muddiness. So you get some of that too, but you gain some of that. But naturally, it stays fairly flat other than a deliberate cut, scoop here on the mid to low end, and then just has a bright presence boost to help it cut across vocals. X-axis, frequencies, right axis, sound levels. So sound goes up, it's taking in more of that sound goes down, taking less of that sound. All right, that should be most of the nerdy parts. Let's talk about how you can use this to choose your microphone decisions. Well, first and foremost, you can pull up a program like, say, Adobe Audition, Reaper, any digital audio workstation, and get any sort of frequency analysis, and you can see where the frequencies of your voice live. So if I pull this all the way back to the raw sample here and boost it up, I'm going to have to undo all of that. But then I jump to a part of the song, we can get a frequency analysis that shows where this voice primarily lives. Granted, again, this is with the microphone it's using. Keep that in mind. You can buy calibrated microphones for, actual measurement and things like that. But this is before we talk too much about frequencies and EQing, which is going to be a lot of this video. Obviously, that's kind of the point. I want to kind of work through with you where the EQ frequencies live. And for this, I'm going to do like a react stream to someone else's video. I'm going to pull it up from a video I recently linked. It's from a gentleman by the name of Joe Gilder. He runs his own Home Studio Corner YouTube channel. He also does great educational content for PreSonus. The dude is a legend. His personal channel videos on EQing and compression and stuff over the years have been instrumental in me actually finally grasping this stuff. And so I'm not going to spoil his whole video. I definitely think it's kind of required viewing. So if this video stops making sense to you, go watch that video and then come back. But I want to give you, based on his illustrations, just a general idea of what we're looking at. So he makes a lot of videos with these illustrations to help you understand balancing the frequencies. So he breaks down where the frequencies are. And again, recommend 100% watch these videos. He's the expert here. I'm just going to kind of summarize for you, which is why I'm being transparent about just using the video and linking it to you so you can just focus on what he says. But effectively, let's just get to the graph here. He breaks down the different frequency ranges of, and the voice. You've got punchiness and boominess in the 50 hertz range and lower. This is most likely going to be boomy. So basically, you got good ideas at the top, bad sounds that you can get out of it at the bottom. Boominess versus like muddiness is kind of the difference of literally like vibrating the capsule with your voice or activating like the subwoofer in a car that shakes everyone's windows. You don't want the boominess. Typically, there's no information usable in a human voice below 50, 60 to 80 hertz. So you want a high-pass filter to roll it off. But you can get some punch out of it depending on your voice and how you emphasize it. The 100 to 200 hertz range is where the warmth is. I talk about this all the time. This is a feature that when I'm not sick, my voice excels at, as long as you start cutting, for me, around 200 to 250 hertz, because you can get into muddy territory. Muddiness is where you kind of clog up all the details and you can't really hear as much clearly because it's just too much unwanted frequencies. So you want to cut the mud out to still have the warmth, nice feeling to it. This makes no sense, but you get what I'm saying. The 500 hertz range, it can make you sound a little full if it's going the right way. I've yet to find a microphone where of all the microphones I keep testing and experimenting with, boosting that range never sounds good. But cutting out a little bit of it will help reduce the boxiness. And this is useful if you're recording in a very untreated space with a lot of drywall, your desk, your computer monitors, and you get some of those reflections bouncing around. You can actually cut here a little bit in the 500 hertz range to reduce some of that, which can be really, really helpful. Now, the 1,000 to, say, 5,000 hertz range, that's where a lot of the clarity of your voice can live, but it's also where a lot of harshness lives. Now, I'd say, he's focusing as general purpose. If we're talking about vocals specifically, I'd say 700 to 1,200 hertz is where the nasally, he crossed it out. That's where the nasaliness of your voice lives. So, if you're congested or you plug your nose, I'm congested all the time due to constant allergies. That's where those frequencies live. And so you can cut some of those out to improve your clarity, to not have those weird nasally frequencies going on. But if you cut too much or have too much of them, then it will start to sound kind of harsh and uncomfortable. And then, of course, the airiness and the overall clarity of your voice lives as you move towards 10,000 hertz. Now, I want to show you a little technique that I have picked up over the years that everyone shares. This isn't like original or anything, to help you understand EQing. And that is to open up your EQ. This is much better, by the way. I'm gonna say now, don't try to EQ in real time while you're recording your voice. Even if you have a mic loopback, your voice reverberates in your head and you get those frequencies bouncing around in your head. You do not sound how you sound to yourself at all. And so if you're EQing based on that, you're never going to get it quite right because you always have yourself echoing in your head. You always want to record samples and EQ from there and then translate it back to whatever you're using to go live. So you come in here to whatever, software you can use for an EQ that matches what you're going to use live. And if you're using a VST and OBS, for example, then you can just use the same VST in Audacity, Adobe Audition, whatever audio software you want to use. But start with a flat EQ curve, play it back, and then take a random frequency and crank it all the way up. Listen to the impact it has. Crank it all the way down. Listen to the impact that has. Then you can get an idea for what the different frequencies have and what impact that has on your voice. And you can also figure out what you need to emphasize or de-emphasize to make your voice sound better. So for example, we cranked up those mids. We got very nasally and like tight, congested sounding. We tank it down. We lose that nasaliness, but we lose a lot of clarity. We come over here to the 150 hertz range-ish here. If we crank it up, we get a lot of boominess. We lose a lot of like understandability of our audio. We crank it down, we get super thin. We crank it up a little bit. We get some warmth. So that kind of idea is how you can identify the frequencies you want to work with and how they play with your voice. And you should spend a lot of time with a lot of breaks and palate cleansers of just listening to other media and coming back to it the next day and everything like that before you make final decisions, because you will often find, much like I've talked about before, where if, you crank something up one day, you get used to it, it sounds fine. You come back the next day, it's going to sound terrible because you went too far. Then you bring it down, find a middle ground. It's an evolving process, one that you learn over time. But as you get used to it, and as you get used to making sure your sound system's set up appropriately with phase, and you got your environment treated, and once you're used to the testing environment, you can become a lot better at it. There's not a whole lot of low end at all. There's some pressure or emphasis here around the most of the mids and that muddiness section. And then you get a spike right around 1500-ish hertz, and then again around 4 to 5K hertz. And that is actually where a lot of the sibilance is that you would roll off with the de-esser. And if I play this back, you're going to hear that it's a little harsh with that.
In a galaxy far, far away, it is a period of civil war. Rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base have won their first victory against the evil Galactic Empire. During the battle, Rebel spies managed to...
Now, the lower you turn down your volume, the less offensive it's going to be. But if you crank up your volume, as I'm going to do here real quick,
steal secret plans to the Empire's...
that those S's, those cut across really harshly, and you want to kind of roll some of that off. But however, you can get a feel for where the voice lives. Obviously, you want to sample different points, but you can see here, it mostly lives in the mids, and then you got some weird harshness in the highs for this person's voice, which means you can choose... you can tell what microphone is actually emphasizing it. And in this case, it is this microphone. This person is using, this is Lily from our Discord server. She is using the RE320. And the RE320 has this big complicated presence boost here, which emphasizes specifically that kind of sibilant sound here on the top end. But then, of course, you can get some nice low end out of it. It is not a flat microphone. It's actually a kick drum mic. It's meant to be able to get real close to the drum and get that boominess, but they also compensate for it by giving it a little nice high-end clarity so you can hear the hit of the drum. Still makes a great vocal mic, still sounds great out of box, but not for all voices. Now, a microphone, I don't have a sample for it, but that we have already confirmed sounds better on her voice is the Rode Procaster. You can see here it has a tiny little, obviously the scale. You're going to notice with all of these graphs, the scales are different, the measurements are different, the way they draw the lines and smooth out the peaks and valleys are different. So you have to take a really high-level approach rather than a granular kind of analysis to each of these when you're comparing, unless you're measuring them yourself. But you've got a bump in the low end for that extra warmth, which is what I always liked about mine. And then starting around 2000 hertz, you got what should theoretically just be a big kind of slow increase up into the highs, which is a little bit less harsh than the specific bump here in the 3 to 5K hertz range. And in fact, if we go over here, we're looking at almost plus 10 dB in that super harsh range, whereas on the Procaster, 10 dB is all the way up here. So we're looking at maybe, obviously this is a logarithmic scale, so it's kind of hard to measure, but we're looking around here, maybe 3 to 5 dB. So a lot less emphasis on there. And that right away, once you have that point of reference and know what you're looking for, you know that a mic that spikes up the sibilant frequency range is not going to be great on a voice that is sibilant unless you want to do a whole lot of compensation in your EQ to make up for that. This is how we can take an approach for post-processing then. And I have completely lost my progress. That's fine. So first and foremost, I'm going to boost this up a little bit because it was a recording with a lot of headroom. So obviously, this is the microphone they have for now. The approach that I take, first and foremost, is to run a compressor. Now, I used to always say that you should EQ before you compress, and admittedly, most of that advice came from back when I was kind of overdoing it in those days, in the very early days of my career. And there's still a strategy. Like, there's a back and forth debate on depending on what you're actually doing, whether you compress first or EQ first, and what your end results are. If you're using a more aggressive compressor, you definitely want to do it first, which is kind of what you're doing for vocals. If you're doing a much lighter compressor just to, keep yourself from peaking, or for instruments, then EQing first can kind of work. I, these days, tend to suggest EQing after you compress because that allows you to actually hear how it sounds. Because you can EQ all you want, and then when you compress it, it's literally, as I've described many times, going to squish the dynamic range out, and those frequencies you thought you tamed, or the ones you didn't think you boosted that much, can end up sounding worse. So first and foremost, I'm going to apply a single band compressor, and I'm going to use my typical vocals here, although I'm going to increase the threshold. I don't want to squish it down too much. I just want to roll off kind of the peaks of this and make it a bit of a smoother experience. So 14, 15 dB gets you kind of in this line. Maybe I'll go a little bit higher, about 12 dB gets you to this line where you're just chopping off these peaks. You're not chopping them off, but whatever. A 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 compression ratio is fine for vocals. And then your attack and release, this can be a whole separate video on how to compress and blah, blah, blah. You generally want a fairly quick attacks in order to, catch your vocals before they peak too high. And then you want your release slow enough that it catches your full syllable sentence however long before you take a break and breathe, but it doesn't cut into your next one. This is a really bad explanation. I've made videos on compressing before. We'll come back to it. And then your makeup gain, because you are squishing it down, if I set the makeup gain to 0 and then hit apply, the makeup gain literally just amplifies it back up so that you can bring it back up, which I can just do single-handedly here. So we just ran a compressor first. Just a basic vocal compressor you use on anything.
An armored space station with enough power to destroy an entire planet. Pursued by the Empire's sinister agents, Princess Leia races...
I'm actually not a fan of this. I'm going to undo it. If you were going for the super broadcasty sound, then you would crank the threshold down to like -25 or something. You'd crank the ratio up to like 4-to-1, 2 milliseconds or something, and then squish everything down and bring it back up. But the problem is you are blending your harsher frequencies with your more pleasant ones. Let's play it back.
Armored space station with enough power to destroy an entire planet. Pursued by the Empire...
Now everything's a little harsh. I'm not a fan of this personally. It removes dynamic range. It causes ear fatigue. And I don't like the settings I did the first time. I think it's because I did not even set this high enough. So I'm going to go back to 3-to-1 because I think that worked best for her voice. But I'm going to go back. We did -12. Do like -10. And in fact, we can zoom in on our range here to see exactly... Yeah, I think 10 will catch more of what I'm trying to roll off more. So I'm going to hit apply, zoom back out so that we're at -0 dB at the top. All right, now we're going to play it.
Secret plans to the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, an armored space station with enough power...
Okay, so now we have frequencies that are more even. If you don't want to know what I mean by that, like the harshness isn't as harsh as it was, but it's also not making everything else harsh with it. So we have a more kind of even signal. We still have to work on that sibilance frequencies though, and that's where the EQ curve I came up for her voice comes in. So this doesn't look like a lot of EQs I would do for my voice. If we come down to, these are probably not going to be good ones. Actually, yeah, those are not my current ones. Actually, we will pull up the EQ curve I'm using for the Revelator Dynamic right now. So the PreSonus universal control software gives you their Revelator products have a DSP built in. And so it does all this post-processing on the hardware itself. So by default, it has a high-pass filter you do at the start of the chain. So I start usually around 60 hertz. I compress first. Again, a fairly high threshold. I'm only doing 2-to-1 here because I don't like squishing out all of my dynamics because I kind of talk in a variety of volumes and I want that to come through a little bit. The EQ curve here is what I would typically do for my voice. I just kind of boost the highs a little bit because I don't have anything too super harsh or aggressive in my high end of my voice based on what I've learned so far. I cut at the mids because I get congested a lot and I tend to sound nasally when I do, and this makes it sound a little bit more pleasant. I boost the low end warmth that I typically have that microphones don't always capture unless I am using proximity effect, and even if I do, just makes it sound a little richer, a little nicer. And then I have the scoop I talked about around 200 hertz that cuts out some of that extra muddiness that comes. So my EQ curve for my voice focuses on the low end here and tweaking that to make sure that it's good, but not too boomy. The low end, or the frequencies I'm focusing on for Lily's voice, is cutting these harsher frequencies in the higher end while still not trying to, I can't change her voice to make it sound like mine, but what I can do is make it sound a little bit thicker without having all this harshness. And I identify it as I play this back and watch through these frequencies.
Ultimate weapon, the Death Star.
This little, what do I have it set to? 6479. And keep in mind, there's this factor called either width or Q width. You can either set it to octaves or Q, depending on the EQ you're using. This determines the size. So I can make it super narrow here if I knew the exact frequency, or I can make it a little wider to, group in a little bit of frequency. So the exact frequency you set isn't exactly super relevant because you're rolling into it with a few of the other frequencies grouped in. So I'm going to reset this back to where it is. This is one of the audition presets. But I have a very harsh cut here. Now, I'm doing this for a specific reason. Traditionally, if you're doing post-processing where you can add any filters you want, you're using VSTs, something like that, you would use a de-esser here. However, the PreSonus Revelator DSPs do not have a de-esser built in that's at least easily accessible. You can apparently use like the key filter or something to turn the compressor into a de-esser, but then you lose it as a compressor. I haven't really figured that out yet, but the easiest way to do it when you don't have a direct de-esser available is to do what I'm doing here and target it in the EQ. You run the risk of messing up some of your other frequencies, but like, let's compare this to what an actual de-esser looks like. I think I can pull it up at the same time. Okay, no, I cannot. But you look at an actual de-esser here. Let's say, yeah, 44,100 hertz to 6,100 hertz. It's just a generic one it shows. But when I play this back,
During the battle, rebel spies managed
it's doing the same thing. It's looking for a threshold of how loud this volume can get in this frequency range before it acts. And then you have a meter that shows how much gain reduction is happening. It is basically a compressor or an EQ happening on it's basically a compressor happening on a specific frequency range. We don't have that kind of flexibility with the workflow that she's working with, and this is easier to illustrate with the EQ. That frequency range is the problem here, and so I'm reducing it. There's also some gnarliness with just general presence boosts around the 2000 hertz range, and then obviously cutting out some of the mids. And then I added just a really gentle low-end boost just to thicken up her audio because her voice is a little thin, a little nasally, a little harsh with the sibilance, and the microphone is not doing it any favors. I think on something like a Procaster, I would not need to do this at all because of the difference in curves. So let's use that to illustrate real quick. Look at the EQ I'm applying compared to the frequency response of the mic she's using. Literally, I'm dragging this down a whole lot. I'm dragging this down a little bit, and I'm boosting this up because it's not, currently present. I don't know if she was using proximity effect or not, honestly, but different voices play to it different ways. So you can immediately see, and note that I did that before even really referencing the response, just because I wanted to check myself. Obviously, the scales are different, which is the annoying part of looking at these graphs, but literally, there is a direct correlation between what this mic kind of overemphasizes that she's using and the frequencies that I'm toning down. And this, if you can put these dots together in your head, once you have tested your voice, really listened on some good headphones or monitor speakers, and played it in an EQ like this that can show it. DaVinci Resolve has free, great audio software built in, even in the free version. Adobe Audition comes with the full Adobe Creative Cloud suite. I think Reaper has a free version. There are options out there. There's a great EQ we just discovered in my Discord server, TDR Nova, which has the full, I think it's called the FFT spectralizer with the EQ going on at the same time. There's videos about how to use it. You got free tools available to you that can help you identify these things. And you can start immediately making better EQ decisions for yourself. And you can then use that once you have learned what's going on to start figuring out what microphones are going to work better for you. And I just want to address something because I got multiple emails after the back and forth in certain Discord servers about certain microphones asking, well, why does the frequency response of a microphone matter if you have EQ available to compensate for it? Yes, you use EQ to tame gnarly frequencies in your voice, in your environment, in the production, in the microphone, but you can't completely neutralize a mic as a result. First and foremost, because the signal's already been digitized. So anything you do is going to be tweaking a digital signal. Now, yes, of course, analog EQs exist. They work and sound a lot better in a lot of situations. But assuming you're in most people's streaming shoes where you have analog straight to digital gear, when you're working with a digital source, EQ is purely digital manipulation, and you're going to get a lot of artifacting as a result. And you can even get comments that say something along the lines of, this sounds robotic-y or fake because you are pushing it too hard. It's not good. But also, you can't realistically compensate for all of this without just, you're going to make yourself sound unnatural because that is how the microphone picked up your voice, and trying to bring all that back down is just going to undo the sound sensitivity and mess up the balance. It just doesn't really work right. You can do it to tame certain frequencies, as we did with the specific, we're not trying to completely undo the presence boost in this microphone here. What we're trying to do is tame the specific gnarly frequency that is causing a problem with the audio. And that is what I have done with this curve. All right, we're done focusing on EQ for now. We can do a whole video about EQ later on if you'd like. I've had some requests for it before, but the rule, as I've pointed out, highlighting, if you're looking for channels to really learn this stuff from, Joe Gilder, he does work for PreSonus, but he also has a personal channel. He does amazing videos breaking down EQ, both for vocals and from instruments, when to EQ, when to compress. Go watch his stuff to really learn. But for now, I will tell you, you want to cut out bad frequencies first and maybe add a tiny bit of boost later to emphasize something you want to sound good. Don't just boost it to hell and back and think it's going to sound great. That's just like cranking up the saturation or contrast slider of a photo or video. It don't work. So how can you use this to then make a decision to buy your microphone? We kind of already teased this, but I want to go through why I like some of the microphones that I like. If you've watched my YouTube channel over the years or seen the microphones I've most consistently used, there are two microphones that are my absolute favorite, and I don't have one of them here with me because they're currently plugged in. Let me go grab it. The first one is one that I have used on this channel for over 6 years now. It's the EposVox RE20. This one in particular is the new black one they released last year, and they sent it when I moved into my new studio, but I also have the greenish grayish one that I have used for, again, over 6 years. This is an expensive microphone. I originally used it when I was interning at radio stations, and this was the microphone in all of the recording booths, and I fell in love with it, not only for the cool, punchy broadcast sound they could get out of it, but because of the flexibility. We were able to easily tune it to any ghost? I guess any ghost's voice, any host or guest's voice, because it was so flexible, and we're going to talk about why in a moment. The second microphone, which I have fallen more and more in love with over the past few months now, is this one right here, which is not the one you're hearing, but it's the EposVox Ethos. And I'm going to show you why for both of these. This is the frequency response graph of the EposVox RE20. It is about as flat as a dynamic microphone can get. Flat mids, teeny tiny, like we're talking, if that's the scale of 0 to 10, that's maybe 1 decibel of boost in the low end. And just a little bit of a wave riding up in the brightness. And you're going to see this even on the flattest of dynamic microphones like this one. You're going to see this because it's a dynamic microphone. Dynamic microphones are meant to be used in broadcast and radio scenarios where most often they're going to be heard over, say, TV speakers or car speakers or being put on top of background sound or sports or whatever. And they're always going to be tuned a tiny bit with, again, this is a sprinkling of presence boost enabled on it, just to give it a little bit of an advantage cutting over background tracks, but also because the difference between, I talk about this in every microphone review, but the difference between a dynamic microphone and a condenser microphone is condenser microphones take an active phantom power, which powers the capsule and makes it sensitive to sound. A dynamic microphone is a voice coil that is effectively activated by sound hitting the coil and causing it to charge up and transmit data, which means it's less sensitive to sound anyway. And as we've seen with proximity effect stuff, the lower end frequencies are more likely to apply pressure to a capsule than higher frequencies, so they make that extra high end just a little bit more sensitive to kind of even it out. Because realistically, like, you're gonna get a flatter sound out of something that compensates for its physical characteristics than, you know, what the graph says. So that's part of the reason the graph doesn't tell you everything. So this is the EposVox RE20. I do want to note also, unlike the RE320, the RE20 carries what they call variable D technology. This is a microphone that does not suffer from proximity effect. Whether you're right up on it or a few inches out, I've used it pretty far away. As long as you're being picked up evenly and your gain staging is set correctly, you will sound exactly the same. Now, of course, the further you get away from the microphone, the more reflections off of surfaces around you and general ambient and room noise you're going to pick up as you crank up that gain. But your tone, your tonality, your low end versus high end emphasis is not affected. This is a huge advantage of the RE20 and why I love it so god dang much. For everyone who says every single dynamic mics require you to be all up on them, no dynamic mic in the world pretty much requires it. It's just a boost you can get to make yourself sound sexy if you have a voice that plays to it and you remember to turn on a high pass filter so you don't murder your viewers' ears. The RE20 doesn't have it in the first place. So I get comments like that on some of my older videos where I like compare the RE20 to another microphone and they're like, you're not all up on the RE20. You gotta be. You don't gotta be. Or people who are like, you changed your distance to the RE20. That changes the sound. It doesn't change the sound. It's literally the whole point of the microphone. But it's super flat. And then, of course, we have the dotted line here to indicate when the bass roll-off switch is enabled on the microphone if you want that. But it plays really nicely to my voice already. But before we talk about this, I also want to get to the Ethos. Here's the Ethos. Now, the Ethos is a broadcast microphone, but it is a condenser microphone, meaning it's activated by phantom power, and we don't see a whole lot of coloration. I don't talk about condenser microphones a whole lot in this video because the nature of a dynamic versus a condenser capsule is so different that the frequency responses play a vastly different role, and especially with things like proximity effect and stuff, it's just a very different experience. So I'm trying to focus on broadcast and streaming here, but this is a condenser microphone, and you can see here a kind of similar situation. On a scale of 0 to 10, we're looking at maybe 1 decibel of a kind of cut on what would be a harsh kind of frequency here. This is about 2000 hertz, maybe. I hate logarithmic scales. This might actually be the 3 to 4K range. So the sibilant range with a condenser microphone is going to be a little bit more sensitive to anyway. You got the tiniest, like less than a decibel bumps on these little higher frequencies just as a bit of a clarity bump. And then you have a smooth wave from the mids to the lows. You know, the mids are about right here. So you get a little bit of the mids and then some lows boosted here with, again, about a decibel less of a bump. It is a very flat microphone. It plays very well with EQing. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that not all microphones could be flat, and that isn't necessarily a good thing. So I prefer these microphones because they're flat, but you, the newbie creator, may not prefer a flat microphone. One of the biggest myths that go around with what is supposed to be the most popular microphone for streaming or whatever, the Shure SM7B, is that it has a very flat response, and that's what makes it sound so great. This is not true. The SM7B is not a flat microphone in the slightest. It is nowhere near a flat microphone. In fact, I find it hilarious when people say that because it's so much not. So, Earthwork Ethos, Electro Voice RE20. These are very flat microphones. This is the Shure SM7B. Keep in mind, this middle line right here is 0 decibels. This would be the flat line. There's literally not a single frequency that just rests at 0 decibels with the SM7B. It is not flat. Now, granted, the line itself can stay a little flat. So, like, the mids to low response is a little flatter than some other mics, although none of the ones that I'm going to show you here. But it is all boosted. The entire mic itself has a very boosted sounding presence, which I don't always even like. I like it much more at a distance. And then you have a specific frequency bump here, and then it starts going down a little bit, and you get a little bit more here. But all of this is boosted above 0. This is not flat. Now, you can enable the bass roll-off, which takes this down, and then you can enable the presence boost, which makes that even higher. When you do that, the microphone gets very bright. It's already a bright microphone, but it gets very bright and then very thin if you have both switches enabled, which in some scenarios for some voices is probably fine, but on a vocal range of me and Mike Delgadio from Booth Junkies all the way up to Bandrew from Podcastage, that is a pretty stark vocal range. I've very rarely heard either of these honestly sound great, and definitely not both of them at the same time. Now, again, the bass roll-off, the high-pass switch, has utility. You can use it to cut down on hum and rumble in background sounds if you have like an AC going, a car running, something like that. Or if you're trying to use it up close, but you don't want the proximity effect. That's a scenario I sometimes get into because I had this whole video a few years back where, because I had originally reviewed the SM7B and I was like, I don't really understand the obsession with it. Everyone making this cliche podcast sound that's super, there's no dynamic range. It's very boomy. Everyone sounds the same. And then I had borrowed it from Mike Delgadio at that point in time. And then a few years later, I bought one for myself because I just wanted to have it for review, to play with it again. I try to re-review mics every so often. I'm going to have a re-review of the RE20, RE320, and Procaster coming soon after 6 years, so stay tuned for that. And after testing it again, I realized that if I kept it at a distance and didn't get as much of this weird boost going on for the proximity effect, I loved the microphone. It sounded really natural, and I was inspired to discover this by Peter McKinnon and Potato Jet, who kept theirs at a distance, and it sounded very transparent. It sounded like a very natural microphone. And I was like, wait a minute, they don't sound like Markiplier or Joe Rogan or whatever, because when you don't play to these weird characteristics, it actually sounds pretty good. But it's not a flat microphone. So whenever people talk about choosing the SM7B over the RE20 or what have you, this is why I choose the RE20. This is why I choose the RE20 for myself. So I wanted to pose those differences between the two microphones just so you had that context. And now let's talk about the upside and the downside of a flat microphone. My voice is totally going out. I've been super sick this week. I am so sorry. So a flat microphone has a lot of pros in the fact that it is basically a blank, super high quality canvas, very, high fidelity canvas for you to paint an EQ on. If you are Michelangelo, that is the microphone you go with. The downside is that to get any great sounding sound out of it that isn't your natural voice, you have to paint an EQ on it. Which sounds dumb. You'd be like, yeah, okay. Not a lot of people know how to EQ, especially beginners. This is why you see so many channels that rush to get an SM7B and then their audio still sounds bad because they got it because they thought it sounded good and they can't compensate for the ways that it sounds, or either they're trying to overemphasize the things the microphone already does great and they mess it up. They're going to have similar results with the flat microphone. Only there are no natural boosts. You can get a great sounding sound out of the SM7B if you just add a light compressor and don't mess with it too much. Everyone wants to apply all these crappy broadcast presets. If you don't mess with it too much, it sounds pretty good. That's not necessarily the case with the RE20. Now, a lot of people like how my natural voice sounds on the RE20 because it plays nicely to my frequencies, because it can shine with my, lower, I can't even do it right now, but my lower end frequencies that usually come out in my videos, and the bit of the highs kind of comes in clarity too. But the drastic difference between the flat neutral response of that mic and what you can do with it with any voice with EQ and the proper treatment is amazing. But it's going to sound like crap out of box, which is why I tend to recommend either the Procaster or the RE320 to newcomers, not only because it's cheaper. The RE20 is an expensive microphone. These are much cheaper at half the price or less sometimes, but you're going to have a better sounding sound out of the box, because a lot of people buy an RE20 and they get disappointed because it's kind of flat. It's kind of tame. It's kind of dull sounding. Not dull, but, just kind of boring sounding, because it's built for radio stations where they have all this racks of processing hardware, and, it's been around for 100 years or whatever, and it's designed to be colored upon. Whereas a lot of other microphones, like the RE320 and the Procaster, and in some ways the SM7B, are designed to just have the coloration right out of the box. So if you're looking for a nice low-end bump, get the Procaster or get the RE320 and get right up on it. Or if you need something that's a little bit brighter, get the RE320 or the RE27ND. That is a very bright microphone. But if you can learn EQ, then you can take this microphone to insane places. Like I said, it is a double-edged sword. I have plenty of videos on my YouTube channel where the RE20 sounded like crap, either because it had no post-processing and I was just, mumbling, or because I put a bad EQ on it. And I am in the situation running a YouTube channel where all my stuff's kind of in one setup, and just the way that I learn and do things is it has to be in my way for me to focus on it. That, the programming concept of don't test in production, all of my testing is in production. So if I do a bad EQ job and I'm trying to figure out if it works right, if I need to go record a video, that video probably has a crappy EQ job, and I just have to deal with the comments for it. So I have quite a few comments where I was either messing with my EQ settings, or they got reset somehow, or I was testing out different hardware EQs that didn't really work out, where the audio didn't sound great. And I just bite the bullet with that and run as I go. You also get to see my progress as I go. These days, which is why I want to review them, I can have a freaking field day with the RE20, because I can tweak it to my heart's content, and I know what frequencies to look for in my voice, and I can do that. If you're just starting out, you might not. I probably don't recommend the RE20 to you, especially given the price. But hands down, the Rode Procaster, which is this frequency response graph right here, has a very subtle coloration, but it still provides that nice punchy broadcast sound, especially once you apply a compressor to it, that I really enjoy. And again, so does the Earthwork Ethos, but that is it's a condenser microphone, so it's going to pick up the natural frequencies of your voice a lot more, but you don't need to EQ it as hard, which is kind of the cool part about condensers, if you can deal with the background sound consequences. Now, speaking of condensers real quick, I wanted to look at as an example. I don't know how accurate this is because it's not from a source I'm used to checking from for the frequency response graph, but this is supposedly the Elgato Wave frequency response. You might notice that it looks a little different compared to most of the dynamic microphones. And again, this comes from a consequence of it is a condenser, not a dynamic. So you see a fairly significant bass roll-off. Condensers tend to pick up your bass a lot more, even at a distance. Condensers are designed to be used at a distance. You can get some of the proximity effect getting right up on it, but they're designed to be used at a distance. And so this is pretty normal for this kind of microphone, and it still produces a fair bit of warmth, especially with a little EQ, in my testing anyway, whereas the mids cut is actually quite appreciated. And then you get a little bit of a brightness here. This spike is about what I determine every time I include it in my comparisons. I'm like, the Elgato Wave is pretty natural, but it is a very bright microphone. This kind of confirms that, because that is, assuming these lines are evenly spaced, which they should be, that is 10 decibels of brightness in the 4 to 500 kilohertz range. So if you're sibilant, it's not going to sound great. Oh yeah, just for kicks, I threw in the Neumann U87, which is a very expensive something I can't afford, legendary microphone. And you can see here, it's a condenser microphone, but part of why it's so legendary, it is flat as hell. It is super flat, other than they have a giant presence boost. It's not giant. It's like plus 4.5, I'm going to say, dB at its highest point. We got a little bit of a presence boost there just to brighten it up, which is, in music, you typically add quite a bit of brightness to all things. So that makes sense. But otherwise, that is one flat freaking microphone. It is going to be one of the most natural sounding voices you get out of a mic. And again, being a multi-$1,000 professional, audio engineer's dream, it's then a canvas for the artist, either the artist itself or the audio engineer as the artist, to create a sound with. And that is a big difference you're going to see. At the end of the day, frequency response graphs are just measurements, they're just numbers, they're just specs, but they can help you either make your purchasing decision as you can kind of determine where your voice lives. And the strategy I showed with Adobe Audition applies regardless of what microphone you have now. As long as you have an actual microphone and I'm not using your earbuds or your phone or something, you're going to be able to, it's going to be colored by your microphone a little bit, but you're going to be able to get a feel for where the harsher or the needs to be tamed frequencies of your voice are. And you can use that to figure out what microphone plays more nicely with your voice. And you can also use that to inform your EQ decisions. Just to wrap things up, this has been a really long video, but I wanted to make sure I provided real educational value in this video. I want to show you an example of why I EQ'd this microphone this way. So this is the PreSonus Revelator dynamic microphone. I have the frequency response curve pulled up here somewhere. It's the same microphone as the PD70. So it should be in the specs here. Yeah, here we go. It's really tiny. This microphone is very, very flat at 1 kilohertz and under, but it does have proximity effect. And then you have a very high boost right here. So for my voice, which kind of lives in the highs and, kind of nasally highs. So I'd say, we can pull up an example here, right here. So obviously this is with the microphone itself, but you can see here, my voice tends to live in some of this is the emphasis from the microphone itself, but it tends to live in the 1,000 to 4,000 kilohertz range is where it starts going back up before you see a whole lot of emphasis from the mic. I guess it would be better if I had an RE20 sample. Actually, I can probably pull in an RE20 sample here. That might be a little bit better. Okay, so this is the RE20, the super flat microphone. You can see here, I have a lot of this low end here, which includes the muddy range. That's why I have to cut it out. And then I lose a little bit, a tiny bit after the nasally range, and then my voice lives in this weird high frequency kind of range as well. So my voice naturally has a little bit of the smile curve in that I have a scoop in the mids and then a lot in this weird kind of frequency up here. But I can use that to make my EQ decisions. So for the PD70 here, knowing what we saw from the RE20, again, it's not a reference or like a calibration microphone, so it's flat, but it's not going to be, that pinpoint accurate that you could literally use the graph for that. But to get an idea for it, you can listen to it, you can use the frequencies, you can match what you hear, try to identify where the frequencies are. Again, go watch Joe Gilder's videos on where EQ frequencies live. I have a perfect one linked below. But using that with the curve of this particular microphone, where it does have proximity effect, this is not illustrated on the chart, but you can literally see if I move away, I start losing some of the lows, and then I get up right on it, and it comes back. So, but you can see here, there's already a fair bit of boosts in these high ranges. So I do not need to do any boosting there, really, just like a slight, increase to make up for the fact that I'm bringing everything down. So I bring down this mid-range that is left otherwise flat on this microphone because I don't like sounding nasally, and then I boost the highs a little bit, mostly to cut the mids. Like basically I'm balancing this out because whenever you on parametric EQs like this, I'll just mess this up just to show you. As you bring this down, it obviously starts sloping all the frequencies down with it. And so you need to compensate for that for a little bit. So since I'm trying to cut out that muddiness out of my voice, which you can very clearly see comes out if I get too much, impact going on, that's not pleasant. I start cutting that out so that I come across more clearly. Then I need to boost this back up just the tiniest bit. Like it's 2 decibels here to bring that warmth back in and keep it from getting dragged down with the mids. And of course, have a high pass filter to roll off the boominess. There's no information in your voice that you need past 50 hertz. Usually past like 80-ish hertz, but I usually start around 50 or 60 for my high pass. So that is how I used the I didn't look at it when I made the curve, but this is how you can use that to inform your EQ decisions, and that you don't need to do a whole lot of boosting for this high end because it's already here. but nothing is being done to the mids and to the muddiness range, so I do need to bring those down. And then since this is otherwise kind of left flat other than the proximity effect, I just want to boost it a tiny bit so it's not dragged down with this. This is a really like high level, super in the weeds. I guess that doesn't mean it's not high level, but this is a super in the weeds kind of discussion about the grit, the tedium of microphone choices. But after a lot of recent discussions, I really believe that it can only be helpful for people to learn, how to use this to best make their decisions. If all this seems like, mumbo jumbo to you, then just go off your ear, leverage return policies as much as possible, and just try it out. Try once, buy once. But I do think having this information, even if you have to watch it twice, I would recommend if you made it, obviously this is the end of the video, so I don't know if you'll see this, but if you made it to any point in this video and you got confused, go watch Joe Gilder's video on EQing first, because it will teach you about the sound frequencies, and then come back and watch this. I think it will, if you watch through this and you're like, I kind of get it, but I don't, go watch that video. It will inform you more clearly about those frequencies, and then come back and rewatch this, and it'll probably make sense with that more kind of clarity in mind. I do hope you found this video helpful. Let's discuss it more over on my Discord server, discord.gg/EposVox. Over there, we have paid premium tier subscriptions where you can get early access to my videos, behind-the-scenes content, a networked community of like-minded creators and streamers and YouTubers and everything to help each other build better thumbnails, titles. We've got channels for getting feedback on your video scripts. And for the higher paid tier, the Teacher's Pet tier, I'm actually offering consultations to just straight up EQ your voice and help you figure out where the frequencies you want to focus on are if you are struggling with that yourself. So come join us there. And otherwise, remember, be kind, rewind. I really hate that I'm making all these educational videos the past couple weeks about audio when my voice is it just cracked. My voice is completely trashed from being sick. It makes me feel like a fraud. I have years of my voice, like in person, live streaming, whatever. But on days like this, where like I feel like my vocal cords are just like rock solid and not moving. Whatever. I'm working with a vocal coach soon, so I can like have better technique and stuff. So hopefully that improves my videos as well. Anyway, see ya.